We're going to have 4 speakers today. Angela Bischoff with the Ontario Clean Air Alliance is going to start. Then we'll have Stefania Fortunio from the Interchurch Uranium Committee Educational Cooperative in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, who I can proudly say my father was one of the co-founders of 30 years ago. We're having our 30th anniversary party in October, so that's very exciting. And Bernine Lloyd from Northwatch will present, and then Gordon Edwards will speak. And the first presentation will be sort of an overview of what's going on, then we'll have uranium mining, high-level nuclear waste, and then the specific issue of the transportation of this, steam generators being shipped from Bruce Nuclear Facility in Ontario through the St. Lawrence River up to Sweden and then back. So with that, please and thank you, Angela Bischoff.
Thank you.
And I'll give you a 5-minute warning, okay?
Okay,
You got
thank you.
15 minutes.
Do want to be in the light. So I wanted to give an overview of nuclear powers in Canada generally, because of course that's what the uranium is used for. As many of you already know, and this will just be a very broad overview, and maybe this is, this is sort of nuclear power 101 in Canada, I guess, and maybe you're familiar with it, so I'll move quite quickly. As many of you know, we built a bunch of nuclear reactors in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in Canada, and haven't built any since, although there have been some refurbishments. But those plants that were built 30, 40 years ago are now all coming to the end of their lives, and that's why we're starting to see some discussion around it again, and we're trying to build a movement, because for several decades there wasn't much happening, and now they're all coming to the end of their lives. They're 30, 40 years old now, and we need to either replace that power or build new reactors to replace it or whatever. So in New Brunswick, the reactor there, they're in the middle of refurbishing that. They're already way over budget and over time, and the activists there are trying to just shut it down altogether, but they're in the middle of a refurbishment. In Quebec, they're planning on refurbishing, but there's a huge public opposition to it, and municipalities and grassroots environmentalists are fighting the refurbishment of Gentilly. And in Quebec, or in Ontario, where we have 20 reactors, 17 of which are working. 17, right? Are working.
Today?
Right now, 17 are working. They are talking about, they're in the middle of refurbishing 2 of the reactors at Bruce Power. They're over schedule, are they? Where are they?
Yeah,
they're over schedule and over budget on the Bruce reactors. They're talking about building 2 new reactors at Darlington, and they're talking about refurbishing both Pickering and Darlington. So a lot of activity that the environmentalists. Yes, Pickering, refurbishing to extend it for 5 years till 2020.
A tiny refurbishment.
Yes.
No, actually, I don't think they're calling it a refurbishment though. Something. It's a tiny little.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a spruce up.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sort of off the radar apparently, but they want to extend it till 2020, and right now it's scheduled to shut down at 2014. So the environmental community isn't really organizing too strongly against that one, but we are organizing against the refurbishment of Darlington and against the new builds at Darlington. And just big picture is the government a few years ago decided that they were going to build 2 new reactors totaling 3,500 megawatts at Darlington. And the environmentalists, including the group that I work with, the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, lobbied the provincial government to specifically, when they put the bid out, to not include, to not allow the bids to come in under budget and therefore have the taxpayers pay for all the cost overruns, which traditionally all of the nuclear reactor projects in Canada historically, every single one of them, they lowball their estimates, they end up coming much more expensive in the end than what their original estimates were, and that's how they get their projects approved. It's a deliberate strategy. Because they claim that it's only going to cost, for example, the Darlington new builds that they want to build, their original estimate was $6.8 billion. They came out, maybe that would, for 3,500 megawatts, that could apparently be competitive with other forms of power. But the environmentalists lobbied government and said, we want those bids to be full costs so that the taxpayers are not bound to pay the cost overruns. And for the first time in nuclear history in Canada, the Liberal government, George Smitherman at the time, the energy minister, when he first came in, that was one of the things he did, is he put that claim onto the bid that the companies had to have a fixed cost price for their bid. And as it turned out, when the bids came in, the one company, the AECL, came with a fixed bid. It was $26 billion. And of course, the government then had sticker shock. It was way more expensive than they thought they could afford. And so they put the whole thing on hold, pending federal government subsidies. So right now, it's in the federal court, and they are, the provincial government is lobbying the feds to subsidize. So taxpayers in Halifax and Saskatchewan would pay for Ontario's nuclear reactors. So everything's on hold there. In the meantime, then, the provincial government decided that they would both refurbish Pickering and Darlington. Again, these refurbishments, at this point, the bid for the Darlington one in particular is not, it's not expected at this point that the bid procedure will make it a fixed cost bid so that the cost overruns won't be borne by the taxpayers. So we're lobbying the provincial government to make that a fixed cost bid so that the cost, when they claim it's going to cost $8.5 billion to $14 billion, which is what their claim is right now, if we look at the history of the nuclear projects in Ontario, they generally have been on average 2.5 times more expensive than the original cost estimate. So that would mean $21 to $35 billion for this refurbishment of Darlington. So we're fighting it on economic grounds, the environmental community and the Ontario Clean Air Alliance in particular. We're fighting it on economic grounds. And we have come out with a bunch of different lobby materials that I want to share with you. These have postcards to Ignatieff and Harper saying, don't subsidize Ontario new nuclear reactors. So these are good anywhere in Canada. Please, I brought 100 only with me. You can order them separately from me. I'll send them anywhere around Canada. They're free. And they're good, they're really good propaganda, and the postcards are free to mail. So you can get your community to sign them and mail them in for free. So that's our nuclear ones. We also have coal leaflets. We're also at the same time fighting to shut down all the coal plants in the province. So anyone who has coal plants, please take these as examples. If you live in Ontario, you can distribute these to your constituents as well. They are postcards to McGuinty and Hudak, the conservative leader, and McGuinty is the liberal leader. But with regard to the Darlington refurbishment, we're just coming out with a new report. Nobody's seen this yet. I just have a draft of it right now. But this will be available online very soon, and it costs out the history of all the nuclear reactor projects in Ontario, and it comes up with the 2.5 times average project, that each project is 2.5 times more than what the original estimate is. So we're pressuring the provincial government to, once again, with this new bid proposal for Darlington refurb, to make sure that it's a fixed cost bid. That's what we're lobbying. Also, we are making the argument that we don't, fortunately, we don't need nuclear reactors to provide power in Ontario because there are so many alternatives that are less cost and less risk. Because, of course, nuclear has not been a super reliable form of energy in Ontario. So the focus of our campaign is that we should be, A, reducing the demand on our energy system, so we could be reducing our demand by 30, 40, 50% quite easily through energy conservation programs. So we're lobbying for much more investments in conservation and efficiency programs. Secondly, we should be importing much more electricity from Quebec as they become, hydroelectricity specifically, as they become more energy efficient, which would be very easy for them to invest in energy conservation programs, which are much cheaper than any other form of electricity. Then they could be exporting much more of their electricity to Ontario. That would be much cheaper for us to be building transmission lines and importing electricity from Quebec than it would be to build new nuclear reactors or wind or solar or anything else. And lastly, we're advocating for a much more efficient use of our existing natural gas plants. So we should be focusing and investing in combined heat and power natural gas plants with the existing plants and making them much more efficient. And all of the buildings in Ontario generally are heated with natural gas, and by implementing special boilers, combined heat and power boilers, we could be using those same molecules of heat or natural gas to provide heat to also be producing electricity. So that's been the focus of our campaign. So that gives you an overview, yeah? Done. I think I'm done. That gives you an overview of the nuclear energy industry in Canada, where we're at, and where the environmental community is going with that.